once again, Canadian football fans, and welcome to part 2 of our look at the 1993 Divisional All-Stars, as today we look at the Eastern Division. If you haven't seen part 1 focusing on the Western Division in 1993, check it out right now. The link is in the description and in the corner of the video. We also looked at which of those Western stars made it to the All-Canadian team, and as you see right here, they've taken 18 of the 27 spots, meaning the East only has 9 to take. Yes, even back then the CFL was ruled by the West, which was disappointing because that year didn't seem to be the prognosis as it began. Oh boy, yeah, you can see where pretty much this is going. This is a gigantic letdown, as the Bombers, of course, looked highly impressive, and I'm sure some of you might have guessed they made it to the Grey Cup before losing to Edmonton. Now, Winnipeg finishing first to make it to the Grey Cup is no surprise. They did that very thing the year before and have done it now 3 times in the last 4 seasons. But last year, the East was actually a very exciting division. The second place, the Hamilton Tiger Cats, who, well, again, had the same record as the last place Western team, the Sacramento Gold Miners, were 11-7 in 1992, but made a terrible trade with Edmonton, panicking and giving up their quarterback Damon Allen. They had 5 wins less than they did the year before. Same thing goes for the Ottawa Roughriders. They were a major letdown. They lost Rob Smith on their offensive line. Also defensive back Les Brown, the CFL's all-time interceptions leader, who was scapegoated by Ottawa and their management for their loss in the playoffs in the Eastern semifinal to Hamilton in 92. Like I said, the O-Riders were 9-9 last year. They had their first 500 record since 1983. And, well, we're back down near the basement again. The Argos were a mess everywhere, despite having great talent, but they lacked reliable coaching, decent management, and that epic ownership group of Gretzky, McNall, and John Candy was just not cutting it anymore, and, well, c'est la vie. And they lost the one guy they invested hundreds upon thousands of dollars in, Rocket Ismail. He finally went to the NFL, and the Argos finished with the league's worst record, 3-15. Just like our last video, we will start with special teams, and special teams returning and saying that right now is the only Toronto Argonauts player to make the team this year, the ever-popular Mike Pinball Clemens. Yes, indeed, the heart and soul of the Argos, and rightfully so, as his 5'5" smiling speedster was not only one of the classiest and nicest players in the game, though his coaching is another story, but in the vein of being one of those guys who was told he would never make it in any professional football league on earth, made them eat their words. His 1,320 overall return yards was second in the league, as were both his 716 punt yards and 604 kick return yards, giving fans a silver lining in a dark clouded season over Toronto. He had 2,114 all-purpose yards and was second in the CFL behind Gizmo Williams of Edmonton in all those categories. He lives up to his name, bouncing out players who try to catch him as they can as he's speeding down the field, but playing with heart and passion above all. He was the recipient of the 1993 Tom Pate Award due to his sportsmanship and contribution to the community of Toronto and the commitment to his team. This is his second All-Star selection. At punter, we have one of the best to ever do it, Bob Cameron of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. Need to bury a top offense deep? Call Bob. Need to angle an important punt out of bounds? You call Bob. Is it windy and you need to sail a high one so the special teams tacklers can get the players down to stop any significant return? Bob Cameron is your man. A veteran of 14 seasons, all spent with the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, Cameron was a valued member of this team the whole time. His 5th All-Star selection was well earned, 3rd in both punting yards and punting average, 5,916 and 42.0 respectively, and played in his 5th Grey Cup game. This was all good enough to put the nearly 40-year-old veteran as an All-Canadian for the 3rd time in his career. For place kicker, we stay in Winnipeg with the highly talented and calm and collected Troy Westwood. This is his 2nd consecutive All-Star selection and only the 3rd season in his league. He is becoming one of the most accurate and efficient kickers upon the CFL. He was 2nd in points with 209, just 7 behind Calgary's Mark McLaughlin. 3rd in overall field goals with 45, and had an excellent 80.4 field goal percentage, only behind Dave Ridgway of the Riders. Westwood also could play well in poor and questionable weather conditions that would affect even the best kickers. Westwood could handle the elements very well. He also played in his 2nd Grey Cup. And now we look at the defensive side of things next in the East. Tiger Cat fans didn't really have a lot to cheer about in 1993, but one man who garnered a fan following was the relentless Tim Cofield. A steal of a deal the Cats got, as the Stampeders didn't let Cofield go without a fight. And the Cats' breakout star would have 19 sacks in the year, 3rd best in the league, and reminded many Cats fans of one of the all-time greats to don the black and gold, Grover Covington. Cofield's pulverizing sacks on quarterbacks made many highlight reels and tied the CFL lead, named Lineman of the Week 3 times. He also recorded 5 sacks in one game against the Toronto Argonauts on Labor Day, tying a CFL record. Cofield was a force on the field and had no trouble breaking through the best offensive lines and hitting quarterbacks. His breakout year resulted in an All-Canadian team selection. Also at defensive end, as the Ottawa Roughriders didn't have much to cheer for either, they had John Kropke, a bulldozer who was 6'4" and over 270 pounds. And the name of the game for him was pressure. His presence on the field was a threat to any given offense, applying pressure for any given quarterback or running back, even to make a mistake. And if he got to you, he got you down good, and had 6 sacks in the year. He's also great at pass blocking, knocking short passes down, and added 2 interceptions as a result of that skill. Kropke was a standout performer and formed a great 1-2 punch with tackle Glenn Kolka. At defensive tackle, perhaps one of the most underrated defensive trenchmen in CFL history, Lloyd Lewis. He had spent most of his career in Ottawa and coming off a year in Edmonton. Lewis was brought in to bring depth to the Winnipeg defensive line, and boy did he ever do that. He obtained 7 sacks in the year, and at 6'3", 250 pounds, he was actually quite fast on the tackle, as after a snap he could just lunge through any offensive line wall and be able to put the pressure on. The way he'd battle a given O-lineman with that pure toughness and aggression was among the best in the CFL. And this was his 4th straight selection, the 5th of his career. Now 9 seasons into the CFL, he also played in his very first Grey Cup. Sometimes it's nice to see a veteran player who has been a very popular fan favorite amongst his team's fans, if you will, who may not rack up many accolades, at least get some recognition for what he does. And that was the case for hometown Winnipeg boy Stan Mikowos of the Blue Bombers. Now in his 12th season all spent in the Peg, he has always been a key member of the Bombers' defense, no matter the era, but never truly got the recognition fans across Winnipeg felt he deserved. He was a warrior, again, battling opposing big men on the offensive line, and when he broke through and applied pressure and brought intimidation, it worked to the Bombers' advantage. With his 3 sacks, he brought 35 tackles with it, and recovered 2 fumbles, and played in his 5th Grey Cup game of his career, and finally achieves his first All-Star selection. The Bombers' dominance continues as now we hit the linebacking core to the league leader in quarterback sacks with 22, the runner-up for the CFL's most outstanding defensive player, Alfred Payton. A prominent member of the Winnipeg Blue Bombers defense for the past 2 seasons, he had a gigantic breakout year this season and emerged as a star with his first All-Star season. Some felt he didn't really have an intimidating presence with his size, and that's why he was passed up by several teams and leagues in his career. But the CFL, he showed just why he's an intimidating presence indeed. And he also had a quick step to begin a rush, a big lunge, if you will, to give him a big jump on the hot pursuit of a quarterback. And he loved to hit. He didn't just sack a quarterback, he made sure the message was sent. And after that, well, he would do one of his famous quarterback sack victory dances. And in addition to his first All-Star selection, he sacked and danced his way to his first All-Canadian selection, also playing in his 2nd straight Grey Cup. We shift again over to Ottawa for another sackmaster, Angelo Snipes. The year prior, he was a finalist for both the CFL's Most Outstanding Defensive Player and Most Outstanding Player, and continues this momentum, tied in 4th best in the CFL with 14 sacks, obtaining a 2nd consecutive All-Star selection. Now, obviously every quarterback sack was for a loss, but Snipes had a way of just dragging it back as far as he could. He made extra sure to make sure a quarterback loses any given yards possible as he could make them on a given sack. He began his career in the USFL as an All-Star in 1985. He bounced a bit around the NFL and finally made a home up north, and it paid off. Over to Hamilton, to a man who had become popular among the city and its fans in his 3 seasons in the league so far, and now having back-to-back All-Star selections, John Moulton, who was deemed too small to be a linebacker at the beginning of his career and didn't talk like most athletes do these days, and he talked on the field to prove everyone wrong. He's one of the most punishing tacklers in the game and finished 2nd in the league in defensive tackles with 84. Despite their rough year, the Cats actually had a good defense against the rush, and to top it off, Moulton recovered 4 fumbles, among the best in the league. And it was clearly recognized just how valuable he is to the Ticats and was selected as an All-Canadian for the 2nd straight year. And now we move to the secondary, the best secondary in the league at that, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers, who led the league overall in interceptions with 37. We start with Kim Phillips at cornerback. A very impressive 5 interceptions on the year for Phillips, but his 5'9" stature and peskiness is what could easily get under the skin of the most highly skilled and even calmly collected receivers, and it often worked to his advantage. He was key in many games won by the Bombers all season, and this indeed was his very first selection. Next up, you had Donald Smith at cornerback for the Bombers. He too had 5 picks in a year, and his impressive speed meant that he could keep up with some of the best in the league, such as Don Narcisse, Earl Winfield, or Eddie Brown, who could go all the way downtown. In addition to that, his 51 defensive tackles were among the best of the defensive backs, as in even if a catch happened, he wouldn't let anything extra result in it. He was also a fantastic special teams tackler, as he caused 5 fumbles on kick returns and recovered 2. He also had a blocked punt on the year to boot. This is his first All-Star selection. The Bombers' secondary prowess continues with Bobby Evans, who, unlike his previously 2 named teammates, had a bit of height on him, and had an amazing precision in his pass covering skills on top of that, seemingly able to read some of the best offensive patterns at his defensive halfback position, and he also had quick hands, so much so you'd think he was a receiver, which is why, like some of his previous teammates, he had 5 picks, and with his quick snags would frustrate opposing offenses. And he'll hit you hard. His 60 tackles were among 4th best in defensive backs in the league, and was also great at knocking away short passes to boot. This is his first All-Star selection. And lastly, for the Bombers secondary, the man who anchored the whole group, 8-year veteran Daryl Sampson. Much like teammate and veteran Stan Mikawus, he had also been a fan favorite in Winnipeg for years, but never truly received a great deal of recognition for what he could do outside of there. Well, this year he got his due, as he had 6 interceptions, which were a career high. But Sampson still did what he did best in Winnipeg all these years throughout his career, and that's simply being an amazing cover man. He added 54 tackles, and when he wasn't tackling, he was hitting you so hard that if you still hung onto the ball, you consider yourself lucky. His hitting skills has always been a key factor on Grey Cup winning teams in Winnipeg, and this year he plays in his 4th Grey Cup game. And despite how great the Bombers secondary was, Sampson was the only one to receive an All-Canadian selection in that group. The Bombers didn't quite get the clean sweep in the secondary category, but make no mistake about it, at safety, Ottawa's Remy Trudel truly deserved his selection. His first, as a matter of fact. He was acquired from the BC Lions and accumulated 6 interceptions on the year, and opposing offenses would try to, kill Ottawa on the long ball due to the loss of Les Brown, but Trudel many times would make them pay a price. He was holding together what was an otherwise lackluster Ottawa secondary and carrying a lot on his back, but he did it oh so well, and became an instant fan favorite in the nation's capital, and is rewarded with an All-Star selection. So that does it for the defensive side of things for the 1993 Eastern All-Stars. Winnipeg garnering 7 of the 12 selections, with Ottawa snatching 3 and Hamilton with just 2, Toronto with none. There were 4 All-Canadian spots that needed to be filled, but Ottawa did not garner any, and of course we all know that Toronto didn't, as 2 went to the peg and both of Hamilton's made the All-Canadian squad to boot. As you all likely predicted, Winnipeg is just dominating and decimating the divisional All-Star so far. And even the 3 spots on special teams, both kicking slots are applied by the Bombers on the divisional side. So now we move to offense, and the first line of offense, again, the men who are truly the ones making sure these big catches, runs, and spectacular highlight reel plays happen, even if they're not shown on the reel, that is, the offensive linemen. Starting at center, we, surprise, surprise, start with the Winnipeg Blue Bomber, Dave Valconet, who achieved his first All-Star selection as part of an offensive line that allowed the second least amount of sacks in the entire league. Dave had superb communications with his QBs Matt Dunnigan and Sammy Garza. His 6'4" presence also helped a great deal in terms of his aggressive blocking style. He fought tooth and nail to even make it to the final roster in the past, as he'd been associated with the Bombers since 1989 but only played 1 game in 2 seasons. But he finally gained a full-time spot on the team in 1991, and this year finally makes it count. Staying with the Bombers, we go to 9-year veteran David Black, who has spent his whole career in Winnipeg, and garners his second All-Star selection and his first since 1989. In the guard position, Black excelled with his excellent skills of keeping his feet planted and stalling some of the best defenders in the league like they're spinning their wheels stuck in the snow. He garnered a Lineman of the Week selection as well. Some consider Black grossly underrated for what he could do on the offensive line, but clearly the league didn't, as this year he garnered his first All-Canadian selection. We now move to Ottawa and Denny Kornopoulos, a second-year guard garnering his first All-Star selection. Denny was key in helping star quarterback Tom Burgess garner a 5,000-yard passing season, and was a wall that was actually on a pretty solid offensive line in Ottawa despite the team's issues all year. Denny was also a great blocker in helping the running game. Denny would win a Grey Cup a year later in BC as part of a team overhaul in Ottawa that saw many players depart. But his career was sadly over by 1996 due to health issues and injuries, and sadly passed away from a heart attack in the year 2000 at the age of 32 years old. We then move on to offensive tackle, but stay in Ottawa, as American-born Mike Graybill, one of the few American-born offensive linemen in the league that wasn't playing for Sacramento, had small NFL experience and recently played pro ball in Europe, but now he finally makes his way to Canada and makes his first season in Ottawa a success. He's an imposing force at 6'7" and nearly 280 pounds. He's the man giving Burgess a lot of room to throw those big passes as well. Despite Ottawa's rough year, their passing game was still on point, and those well-timed, long passes to the likes of Jock Climby and Stephen Jones were made possible thanks to Graybill in his first selection. And now we go back to Winnipeg, and one of the all-time greats, offensive tackle, 13-year veteran, 6'7", 325 pounds, the CFL's most outstanding offensive lineman for the second time, having won it previously in 1987, Chris Walby. Throughout his entire career, from Hall of Famers Dieter Brock and Tom Clements, to a variety of QBs such as John Hufnagel, Roy DeWalt, Sean Salisbury, Lee Saltz, All-Star Tom Burgess, and now for the great Matt Dunnigan, Chris Walby has blocked for an array of different quarterbacks who all have one thing in common: they practically trusted him with their lives. Often considered to be one of the most legitimately tough players in CFL history, Walby showed often he was not to be messed with, and garners his 9th All-Star selection and 5th straight of his career. Also, he played in his 5th Grey Cup game, along with fellow Bomber stars Bob Cameron and Stan Mikabus, who I mentioned. He's one of the 3 players left remaining who also won those 3 Grey Cups with the Bombers way back when in 84, 88, and 1990. It goes without question, arguably the greatest offensive lineman of all time is an All-Canadian. Now we look at the receivers, and I mentioned in the last video a record 18 receivers garnered 1,000 yards. So the picks wouldn't always come easy, but this one likely did, as we take a look at a runner-up for the CFL's most outstanding Canadian, Gerald Wilcox of, yes, the Winnipeg Blue Bombers. He was a great target for up-the-middle passes and a favorite target for quarterback Matt Dunnigan all season. His risky, yet paying-off catches up the middle, and the fact that he could dodge oncoming tacklers significantly is what helped him during his breakout year. His 1,340 yards receiving were 6th best in the league, same goes for his 79 catches. He also had a great reach for high passes, and with his 6'2" frame, was also a solid blocker on many plays as well. Again, Winnipeg's blocking was a key part of the team all year. He was as complete as a slot back as anyone could ask for, another major factor as to why the Bombers made the Grey Cup. We shift again to Ottawa. That's like a pattern here. Where the next slot back is Jock Climby of the O-Riders. Yes, long before we were shutting out TVs for him to shut the hell up while he was an analyst on TSN, Climby was actually one of the best slots in the game. And in his 4th CFL season, he was able to garner his first 1,000-yard year with 1,281, 8th best in the league. He made many highlight reels, making some of the most difficult catches, and doing so with some flair. He also had a great arm reach and was known at times to break out and run for those extra 10, 15, 20, or even longer yards, as his strides and his leg strength made him an extra danger. An asset to Ottawa quarterback Tom Burgess all year, their chemistry was very underappreciated. Sticking to Ottawa, we move to wide receiver, 9-season CFL veteran Stephen Jones, one of the most uniquely gifted and downright exciting wideouts in the CFL during this time. His 1,279 yards were good enough for 9th best in the league, hitting the 1,000-yard mark for the 4th time in his career. His ability to leap for a given long bomb and to speed past an all-star cornerback made him an asset to any team year after year. His eye for the ball was something to behold. He's often a favorite target of Burgess as well, so often as a matter of fact, his 74 catches were 9th best in the CFL. This is his 3rd selection at the age of 33, where most receivers seem to slow down. He was doing anything but, and had one of the best seasons of his illustrious career. Some feel a Hall of Fame career that is yet to be honored. And the last receiver spot, we go to, oh look at that, Winnipeg. And Big David Williams, in his 4th selection. At 6'3", one of the taller wideouts in the league, Williams was very agile and fast for his size, and throughout his 6-season CFL career, he has clicked with one quarterback more than any other, Matt Dunnigan, as Williams started his CFL career in BC, where he played with Dunnigan, and won the league's most outstanding player in 1988. They reunited in Toronto, where Williams was again an all-star, and now he'd arrived in Winnipeg. The two simply have always made each other better, and Williams was at his best, even at the age of 30, garnering 1,144 yards, his 4th 1,000-yard season, all of which involved Dunnigan in some way. His 84 catches was 4th best in the entire league, and whether on a short pass to pick up some yards and on a long pass, Williams could do it all and was very diverse in what he did. He and Dunnigan are, in my opinion, are the most underrated QB receiver duo, I'd say, in CFL history. And to top it off, he's the East's only representative at receiver for the All-Canadian team. His first selection since his very first in 1988. And now we're in the backfield, and starting things off for the Bombers in a year, again, where I mentioned there were no 1,000-yard rushers in the league for the first time since 1953. The CFL focused a great deal on blocking backs for recognition, as we saw in the West with Sean Millington. It's nice to see one of the best blocking backs of his time finally get his due, 8-season veteran Chris Johnstone. For years, he was a key part of the Edmonton Eskimos' success before coming to Winnipeg, as he was someone else Dunnigan was very familiar with. It's Johnstone's block prowess that allowed quarterbacks such as Dunnigan, as well as Damon Allen, Tracy Ham, two more Hall of Famers, to take off on those famous runs all the way down the field, and was key in that regard of all of them in their running game, opening up those big blocks. He played in his fourth Grey Cup game after playing with 3 at Edmonton, where he obtained a ring back in 1987, and of course this is his very first All-Star selection. As I pointed out, there was no 1,000-yard rushers in the league, which is indeed true. 1992 only had one, and that was this guy, Michael Richardson. To be fair, I should point out that the reason why there were no 1,000-yard rushers, and there at least should have been one, and again it should have been Richardson, just because he missed 6 games due to injury, but still had 925 yards rushing, as I alluded to. And he still led the league, which were also due to the great Winnipeg blocking team, as he worked very well with the offensive line as well as Johnstone. At 6 feet tall and just under 200 pounds, he was in great shape. He was the dream running back for the CFL at that time. His ability to follow the right blocks and his downright dangerous speed when he took off made him an instant star, and wasn't afraid to try to run over defensive opposition. His savvy on the run helped Winnipeg be the most complete team in the league in terms of offensive threat. In a year where running wasn't really a priority, Richardson still stood out above his peers and garnered the recognition he deserved, as he made the All-Canadian team for a second straight year, avoiding a sophomore jinx. Well, that is the All-Canadian team filled, but we still have one more position in the East to fill. And you probably guessed a long time ago, it's Matt Dunnigan. Indeed, this is his third selection and his first since 1988, as he does become the second quarterback in CFL history to be named an All-Star with 3 different teams. He already holds the record for the first quarterback in CFL history to start a Grey Cup with 4 different teams, a record that he set the prior season. Dunnigan, as of present day, has not only gone down as one of the greatest quarterbacks in CFL history, but he has gone down as one of the most strategic and smart. He knows what makes a winning combination, a winning formula of any given team work, and knows how to bring it all together no matter where he plays. And he'll make the suggestions to his coaches and management, and since they know how smart he is, they will listen, and more often than not, it has paid dividends. He brings out the best in his receivers and vice versa, and communicates with his blockers and backfield like any great pivot should as well. For the first time in his career, he was a runner-up for the CFL's most outstanding player. His 4,682 yards were 4th best in the league. His 36 touchdowns were not only the second in the league, but a career high to boot, beating his previous best of 27. He was also in his 11th season and just really getting into his best years. Let's not forget how he is on the ground to boot, as even at 33 years old, he was 7th in the league with 517 rushing yards. Unfortunately, with just a couple of games remaining in the season, Dunnigan suffered a devastating leg injury, and the prognosis was not good, and he would indeed miss the rest of the year, robbing us on what would have been a great Grey Cup matchup and the only Grey Cup matchup between Matt Dunnigan and former teammate Damon Allen, 2 CFL greats. It also stopped Dunnigan from setting another CFL record. It would have been his 6th Grey Cup game that he had started at quarterback. Dunnigan did everything he could, coaching from the sidelines, assisting quarterbacks such as Sammy Garza, who had to step into an impossible position, and managed to help Garza and the Bombers get past the Hamilton Ticats, who nearly pulled off an upset in the Eastern Final. They got to the Grey Cup, but it wasn't enough to beat Edmonton. Garza was just completely outmatched by Allen. Well, in the Western video, we mentioned that 11 other players on that divisional team out of 27 have since made the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. In the East, only 5 have made it, being Dunnigan, Peyton, Walby, and Cameron, all with the Bombers, and Argo great Pinball Clemens. However, you can make arguments for Stephen Jones, David Williams, Troy Westwood, Jock Climby, even Lloyd Lewis, and to a lesser extent, even Angelo Snipes. Still, I would say they all have a chance, and that would actually bring the total one day to 11, if that's the case. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers set a CFL record that still stands to this day with 17 All-Star selections in their divisions. That is remarkable. That is almost 2/3. What more can be said? They were 14-4 in a division that was supposed to be much more competitive on paper and had 8 wins more than the second-place team. But they had Hall of Fame talent and were stacked to the gills in every group, and also led each side of the ball in this regard on offense and defense in terms of selections and even special teams. Some, including 10-year-old me, however, were surprised that even Ottawa, who had a worse record than Hamilton but only by 2 games, They had significantly more All-Stars with 7 compared to just 2 for Hamilton. Now, I've looked at this now further with older eyes. Ottawa, to be fair, should not have been this bad for one, and they lost several close games. Whereas many of Hamilton's losses, they were getting annihilated and throttled and had the second worst offense in the league. But some argue that Bruce Perkins, a punishing fullback who had 812 yards rushing on the year, that was third best in the entire league, should have been picked over Chris Johnston. I still find that a very valid argument. I mentioned in my Tycat video, however, that the league and media has bastardized this team in the past and snubbed them in these cases. Earl Winfield had a great year, but again, 18 receivers with 1,000 yards, not everyone can make it, and Earl didn't quite have the same year that Stephen Jones or David Williams had. The Argos' only selection was being pinball, and it was very well earned. And for the All-Canadian team totals, here they are. Well, despite the fact that the West took up 18 of 27 spots, and 7 of the remaining 9, however, were taken by the dominant Bombers, who edged out the Stamps for the overall total, who had 6. Their records are very similar and only 1 win away from each other, and they were both the most dominant teams in the league, and the numbers added up. It's no surprise that Edmonton and Saskatchewan were very close when they were regarded as they were only 1 win apart to boot. Saskatchewan had 1 more with 5, despite the slightly less 11-7 record compared to Edmonton's 12-6. They'd have 4. But their offense was considered one of the weaker ones in the West, believe it or not, as it was still pretty damn good. BC sadly was the worst of the best in the West. Hey, there you go. And got overlooked in many ways. However, get this, despite Ottawa getting 7 divisional selections over Hamilton's 2, none of Ottawa's players made the All-Canadian squad, and both Ticats selections did. A very interesting list to say the least. The Miners got their 1 guy in, the Argos at 3-15 didn't have 1 star, Pinball Clemens had a great year, but not quite as good as Gizmo Williams. Well, that does it for our look at the 1993 season and its wackiness and its players, and this video came out more like a recap of the 1993 Winnipeg Blue Bombers, with the other teams just mentioned a lot. Well, some more than others, being Ottawa and Hamilton, because they both made the playoffs, and Toronto, who didn't, gets mentioned the least. Well, it really does kind of add up. Well, what other years of All-Star teams in the CFL would you like to see us cover? Let us know in the comment section. Until then, click like, share the video, hit subscribe. Until next time, I'll see ya.